Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Technology Risk Management, Driving Federal Mission, Business, and Risk Decisions with Real-Time Data, sponsored by Tanium on Federal News Network. I'm Jason Miller, and my guests today are Jeff Schilling, the Chief Information Officer for the National Cancer Institute at the National Institutes of Health, Nicole Puri, the Chief Risk Officer for the Bureau of Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department, Ted Okada, the Chief Technology Officer at FEMA in the Homeland Security Department, Major General Maria Barrett, the Commander of Army Network Command, and Ralph Kahn, the Vice President of Federal for Tanium. Last segment, we talked a lot about data, ensuring you have good data, ensuring your data works, ensuring your data is there for decision makers. So let's take the next step. Okay, we have good data, or at least better data. Okay, we get the data to the decision makers. How do we ensure that those decisions that are made are carried out, they're implemented? This is very important, obviously, for security. But Nicole, let me start from the broader perspective, since obviously you look at this risk management from the enterprise-wide view as well. What is the Bureau of Fiscal Services process to say, just because we made a decision, how do we ensure that decision goes from A to B to C?
Yeah, and we do use a risk process for that. So I think the way that we approach it is from multiple perspectives, because I don't think there's any one way that works perfectly. So you almost always have to have a couple different approaches. I think probably as many agencies do, we assign owners to risks, right? So if we identify something that needs an action and mitigation, we assign an owner to it, usually an executive owner. And that starts the process off. From there, to kind of make sure that something is happening, you have to do some level of monitoring. So we look at our risks quarterly, we report on them. All of our major technology and IT risks, which are generally at the top of our portfolio list of risks, we make sure that we get updates on those quarterly to make sure that progress is being made. But I think in addition to that, and maybe more importantly, is how do you know that those decisions were the right ones? Or how do you know that the progress that's being made is the right type of progress or the right level of progress? And that's where I think you have to look to more of a continuous improvement perspective, right? So what we're planning on doing, where we're just getting started on this now, is to take a look at, on an annual basis, whether or not what we identified as risks and actions that we wanted to take against those are actually, again, contributing to outcomes, right? Talked a lot about outcomes today, and I think it really does come down to that. We can identify risks and talk about them all day long, but if we're not actually making progress on something, then what's the point? So we'll be looking at some of these decisions that we're making. Are they really having the outcome that we intended them to have a year or more down the line? And if not, that's an indicator to kind of take a step back and say, maybe we need a different approach here. So I think it's, there's kind of multiple ways to look at this, but hopefully you hone in on the right answers over time by, tackling it from different perspectives.
Now, Nicole, let me pick on you for a second. It sounds like quarterly reports, year long. It seems like, wow, things change so much, especially in technology. Help me understand a little bit more. I mean, yes, these are maybe the check-in times, but I imagine if something big happens, it's daily, it's hourly, it's more often check-ins. Walk me through that process too.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, our IT department definitely is managing risks and making decisions on a daily basis. And we have a number of tools that allow us to do that internally. All of those things don't rise to the level of talking about them, every day though, or I guess what I'm saying is, a lot of what I focus on are things that impact, the Bureau as a whole. And so looking at them, less frequently is okay. And that's part of the decision making. But yeah, no, we absolutely have an IT department that does that, and I think does that very well. So what they do is they maintain their own processes for, how they determine what's important at any given time, how they are going to act on it. And then that gets reported up through various processes, through what I do and through other forums. And so again, it is still a feedback loop, but I think that because our executives meet regularly, there are more regular feedback loops to be able to say, yeah, that is the right decision, we want to continue, or let's take a step back and relook at this.
I kind of knew the answer to that, by the way.
Yeah.
Hey, Jason, I wanted to add this, Jeff, I wanted to add that, I think IT and ITIL, it has a lot of very acute management capabilities in it. So when people do just standard IT service management and they use ITIL, they're able to address the day-to-day, this system is down, I need to get it up, and things like that. That's where I don't think the risk management really is even required for us. Generally, where it is needed is this long haul. This system is old, this technical debt that Ted has talked about, and leadership just says, it seems like it's fine to us. Why are we going to spend millions of dollars fixing this old thing? It's like, and they're not, they don't care about all the extra hours everybody's put in to keep it up and running. It's up and running. And so I think that what the risk framework gives us is a much larger, or it gives us clarity to leadership on a future that they would not like if they don't address this today. And I think that's where it's really said. So that's why Nicole mentioning that it's quarterly or even annual reports to say, are we moving and are we removing this risk? Because risk is accumulating too, right? We have new threat vectors, we have new things that we have to do. And so we're taking on risk, because even if we don't do them, that's more risky. The American public expects to have this information, right? Ted would say that big time. He would be like, well, what's going on? Why isn't FEMA telling us what's going on? It's like, well, FEMA communicates to the states and the states aren't telling you, but FEMA maybe hasn't worked with the states to build up their communication methodologies and their communication technologies. So to me, I think the threats are accumulating, and if you don't remove them with this at the same rate or greater, you're going to be in a bad place. But the IT services area is very mature. We can keep these systems up and running. Are they functioning to the mission? That's the question.
So to piggyback on that a little bit. So, back to the auditing comment from earlier, when people see a report from a piece of technology, most of the times they assume it's correct. And so one of the things that we've observed is a lot of the legacy, for instance, a lot of the legacy patching software will say, yes, you're patched. And then you go back and check and you realize, oh my, that patch may have been delivered, but it didn't take. Or your security suite says, yes, we're configured and all the controls are set appropriately per your policy. And then you go back and check and you discover, oh, well, 15% of them have atrophied over time and they're no longer set correctly. And without going back to that auditing capability, oftentimes we get lured into a false sense of security because the program is telling us, the report's telling us, oh yes, everything's good. But in reality, as Jeff mentioned, risk drifts over time. You accumulate new risk and you need to kind of go back and check it frequently, particularly in areas like cyber, where if you're unpatched for a day, you're fine. But if you're unpatched for 90 days, that's a much bigger issue. Same thing for your security controls. If you're paying a lot of people money and you're paying a lot of money for security software, but it's not staying configured, that creates a pretty significant risk from a cyber perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, this idea of accumulating risk is almost like cognitive load, right? At a certain point, people get overwhelmed. I mean, and this is a leadership issue. So in other words, you can get to a state of moral hazard. And what is moral hazard? It's nothing more than an asymmetry of information. It's basically hidden risk. We like to say, at least I say to my team and others, managers execute against certainty, but leaders execute against uncertainty. So the challenge is, I think the point that Nicole made, if you're going to do continuous improvement, that's kind of like fast fail. How do we get to a fast fail state? Fail small, fail often. I mean, that's been a trite term for a long time, in government and industry. But that's like your minimal viable product. So we're moving away from sort of a passive continuous diagnostic monitoring to more active testing. But that requires the leadership. That's your whole point about auditing. I shouldn't trust a single pane of glass. Because if I said, I want everything on a single pane of glass, that you've already just made a decision to fail because you're going to get hit in risk. It takes effort to actually interrogate data. And I think to the previous conversation about data, we're getting so much, right? The data exhaust is overwhelming. And there's a cost that's associated with the hygiene to fix null values, missing values, et cetera. So, we also like to say the big data checks big data. And I think in that world, we have to be comfortable with uncertainty inferential models, right? Statistical significance. I think General Barrett that mentioned confidence, right? How much confidence do we have in the data? And I think that's the future for us as government leaders. We have to be really comfortable with uncertainty. And in fact, that's a leadership quality that's more and more being pushed down into the ranks, right? It's no longer your top agency head that has to manage uncertainty. That uncertainty has to be managed all through the staffing structure of an organization. And that is probably the biggest challenge that we face in the years ahead.
Major General Barrett, we're just running up against the clock here. So let me just bring you into this discussion in this segment here. We got into the cyber area a little bit, the technical debt side. Ralph brought up this idea of if you're not configured correctly, or you think you are, but you're not. Walk me through when you guys are using data to ensure that data is correct and and the decisions being carried out. That becomes even more important as for serving the warfighter, for serving the Army's mission.
So I could talk about comply to connect, continuous monitoring, zero trust, is all concepts and things that would help us. But I think bringing it back to the data theme, really have to think about data not as looking at trees. You've got to see the forest. And so I don't want to be chasing singular vulnerabilities. I don't want to just be chasing a singular high CVSS score vulnerability. I need to be looking at how a combination of medium CVSS, this has to be a more flexible and agile way in which we analyze the risk, the accumulated risk on our networks in order to make those decisions. And so to the extent at which we can automate them and make a very sophisticated view of the data that we're using to make these decisions, and not these very serial decisions about let's close vulnerability X. That's where we need to be, and that's where we're driving toward.
All right, there's so much more to talk about, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. So first, let me thank my guests. Jeff Schilling, the Chief Information Officer for the National Cancer Institute at the National Institutes of Health. Nicole Puri, the Chief Risk Officer for the Bureau of Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department. Ted Okada, the Chief Technology Officer at FEMA in the Homeland Security Department. Major General Maria Barrett, the Commander of Army Network Command. And Ralph Kahn, the Vice President of Federal for Tanium. I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the panel discussion at Technology Risk Management, Driving Federal Mission, Business, and Risk Decisions with Real-Time Data, sponsored by Tanium on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Tanium.